Good afternoon and welcome to the World Economic Forum annual meeting and to this session, Achieving Responsible Production and Consumption. Thank you for joining us here in person and also virtually from around the world. My name is Jessica Cheam. I'm founder and managing director of EcoBusiness, Asia's largest independent sustainability media platform, and I'm delighted to be your moderator for this session. Allow me a moment to set some stark numbers. The global population hit 8 billion people in November, of which the global consumer class is projected to grow to more than 5 billion people over the next decade, driving a 50% increase in consumer spending. At the same time, we need no reminder that we are in a climate crisis. We can see that reality in headlines every day and in the lack of snow on the slopes. It is on our watch that we have entered the era of the Anthropocene, of unprecedented biodiversity loss and species extinction. We are without a doubt living outside our planetary boundaries. Some of you may have heard of this concept called Earth Overshoot Day. It marks the date when humanity has used all the biological resources that the Earth regenerates during the entire year. Last year, it fell on 28th of July, and every year it is getting earlier and earlier. We cannot continue this way. The United Nations has dedicated SDG 12 to responsible consumption and production precisely because of its significance. We will need to meet the demands of a growing population by radically changing our production and consumption models to ensure that they are environmentally sustainable and that they ensure societal well-being. Today, I'm delighted to welcome our distinguished panel of speakers. They are captains of industries leading massive organizations across the world whose products touch billions of lives daily and whose impact is sprawling. What we hope to do here is to crystallize the role that businesses can play to transition to responsible models, to shine a light on the successful game-changing examples which have worked, and to increase the level of ambition that key drivers can play. Our panelists here today are Salil Parekh, Chief Executive Officer and Managing Director of Infosys, McMillon, President and Chief Executive Officer at Walmart, Alexandra Keith, Chief Executive Officer of Beauty, Executive Sponsor of Sustainability at P&G, and MacLennan, Executive Chair of the Board of Cargill. Please join me to welcome them. We will be taking some questions later, so do look out for that. But first, I'd like to start off this question for Alex. P&G has a major global footprint, and you serve nearly 5 billion people around the world. So how is your company leveraging innovation to embed circular models into the core of your operations, and how are you measuring its progress?
First, thanks for inviting me. I'm happy to be here. So I think a couple things that I would like to mention at the beginning. Sustainability and delivering circular models cannot be a side activity. So I think to embed it in our everyday work, we've done a couple things. One, integrated it directly into our business strategies. And importantly, then pivoted to having our business units lead it and be responsible for delivering the commitments that the company has made. By having our business units lead, that ensures that our teams that are doing the work every day are bringing to life the commitments in the work we're doing across things like our brands. So we've made a commitment to have 100% of our plastic packaging be either recyclable or reusable, and we're already at about 80%. That's come to life because the teams that are creating those packages are up against that goal and are thinking about it as they are doing their work. In our operations, and I know we'll talk more about supply chain more deeply, but I will just touch on, we, as with many other companies, are looking at digital models and automation to help us use resources a lot more effectively. And we are also, in our own operations, working against sustainability goals like zero waste to landfill, use of renewable energy. But the last area is really about transformative partnerships, because it's in the partnerships across the ecosystem where I think the biggest breakthroughs will come to life. Those are with our retail partners, like the one we have with Walmart, which I know Doug will talk about. You'll have to talk about it. Or in industry coalitions. So, for instance, one of the innovations that our teams have developed is a digital watermarking for plastic packaging that is invisible to the consumer eye, but allows for much more efficient and effective sorting of plastics at recycling facilities, which is one of the biggest barriers to actually having plastics be recycled because of the different types of plastics that exist in the world. We've taken that digital watermarking technology to an industry association, the European Brand Association, and we're working across the industry to bring that to life. Finally, we're doing other innovations that we're bringing to life. We're bringing in other business models, whether that be licensing technologies or working in partnership with some of our suppliers. We have, as one example, we created an ability to take colored PET plastic, which is currently in most places not recyclable, to almost virgin PET. And we've partnered with Eastman to bring that technology to life and to allow it to be available to the broader industry. So I'd say ultimately it's about embedding it in the daily work of our teams through our business strategies, but also really focusing on transformative partnerships.
Thank you very much. I'll come back to you in some really good themes that you fleshed out here. But first, David, let's come to you. Cargill is a massive company with huge footprints across the globe and a key player on the supply side. So what is Cargill doing in the area of responsible production and consumption?
Yeah, and I'll pick up on some of the things that Alex said. And I was reflecting on when I first started coming to Davos, I'm going to say it was 10, 11 years ago. Sustainability was discussed, but nothing like it is today. And to Alex's point, it's embedded in our business strategy. It's embedded in our conversations. And the topic of the time was GMOs. You really don't hear much about GMOs. And GMOs are a tool for sustainability. So the point I'm trying to make here is that I think we've come a long way in terms of business and building sustainability into our strategy, into our business operations. Point number one. Point number two is the good news is until, I'm going to say the last 5 years, agriculture and food in terms of venture capital, equity, investment equity going into it was kind of a sleepy industry. So there's a stat which I'll get precisely wrong but directionally right, which is, but in 2014 about $2 billion was going into ag production, sustainable food systems. In the last year with statistics, it was $30 billion. So I think capital has figured out there's a tremendous opportunity, but I would say more precisely there's a tremendous necessity in order to have new and innovative ways of creating food production, but also thinking about food consumption. One of my favorite examples from the Cargill portfolio of things that we've been doing is what I would call, and we just opened the facility in Ghent, Belgium in June. And I was at the grand opening, and I would call it third generation biofuels. So if you think about what has been going on in ag and energy, and that is going to be one of the great opportunities and moments in ag in the years ahead, if you think about biodiesel, you think about the ethanol craze in the early part of the century, sustainable aviation fuel. So agriculture is a solution for alternative forms of energy. But the facility we built in Ghent, and we started planning it about 3 to 4 years ago, is basically it takes used cooking oil, used tallow, and converts it into an energy product. So it means you're not growing more, you're not producing, obviously not producing oil or carbon-based products. You're not growing more crops to create energy. You're taking that which is already in the system, and I think it's a great example. Talk about circular economy. So we take used cooking oil, used tallow from the hospitality industry, from the food service industry. We convert it to transportation fuel for the shipping industry and the trucking industry. And so to me, that represents, to us, it represents a closed system, a circular system for the production of energy products.
Thank you very much. And actually, it also diversifies your business.
It does.
I think that, that conversation around sustainability being a cost is now rapidly changing and it's becoming an opportunity.
Exactly.
And in responsible consumption and production, we've very much seen this investment opportunity as well.
And that won't be the last of those facilities. We're already thinking about our next one.
Absolutely fantastic. Well, coming to Doug at Walmart, Walmart's one of the world's largest company by revenue and a behemoth when it comes to operations and supply chain. How are you approaching this issue, and how do you engage both your supply chain and your customers?
Yeah, we went through a mindset shift, 2004, 2005 in particular, and started thinking about our business differently, more like stakeholder capitalism. We had been really focused on customers and associates, as newer companies do, and we cared about shareholders, but we knew that shareholders would benefit if we took care of those first two groups, but not as much strategy and thought about communities and the planet and the way that we interacted with suppliers. So since then, there's been a lot of change and I think more maturity within the company as it relates to this. And in those early days, we did the calculations with help to figure out what our footprint looked like. And somewhere around 8% of our carbon footprint at that time was our own assets, our stores, our trucks. The other 92% was in the supply chain. And so we knew we needed to walk the talk first. So we started with auxiliary power units on our tractors. We started with more advanced refrigeration equipment in the stores, doing what we needed to do so that we had some authority to then reach to our supply base and say, we want you to collaborate and help us with this journey. If I fast forward to today, some of the things that we're doing, which P&G and Cargill are participating in, are in the category of Project Gigaton. We set a goal of getting 1 billion metric tons of greenhouse gases either avoided or eliminated from our big supply chain. We started that a few years ago, and so far more than 4,500 suppliers have participated, and they report that they've eliminated more than 574 million metric tons of greenhouse gases through that work, and it's one big collaboration. So if you were sitting in one of our supplier meetings, we would be talking about the entire system, and that's been one of the cultural changes within the company, is that we're more systems thinkers than we used to be. And we will be talking about not only what is the customer reacting to, what should the package look like, how can we get rid of some packaging, but how we move goods. We had a great meeting in Cincinnati not long ago trying to put our transportation systems together, looking at it like it's one system to create more of an optimized transportation network. That collaboration, one's a lot of fun. The work is rewarding and it helps us retain people and attract people. And the scale of what we're doing, I think, is hopefully proving that size can be a good thing. We try to be thoughtful about, how we collaborate, but it feels to me like we're making a lot of progress, but still have a long way to go.
Yes, thank you very much for that. I think with Walmart, it really exemplifies the role of businesses and how much resources you have within your power to actually drive this change. And actually just picking on something you said, a couple of years ago, Walmart came out to say that it's a regenerative company. And regeneration is something that's been, very, very much talked about in the responsible consumption and production space. I wonder, can I ask you, how do you define that, and how is Walmart kind of implementing that from a day-to-day basis?
The concept is we want to leave things better than we found them. And so if you think about a place-based orientation, for example, a factory somewhere in some place, the US or some other place in the world producing product, we want to work with that supplier to help them think about everything from their water usage to the raw materials that are in their product, the way they pay people, do you pay overtime appropriately, et cetera, so that when you're through, that place is better than it was when we started. And so regeneration is a big aspiration, and we started with protecting millions of miles of ocean and millions of acres of forestry to start moving that direction. But I think the real work, the hard work, and the work that will make the biggest difference is one product, one factory, one supplier at a time, thinking about that whole system. So we're early in our journey there, but we've got a lot of, it's interesting, people sometimes ask me, are you having to coerce suppliers or somehow pressure them? I can't think of one single instance where that's been the case. The companies that we work with, large and small, all want to make progress on these things too. And the issue is, how do you exchange information? How do you work together in a way that it is truly effective and holistic? And again, it's a fun set of challenges.
That's great. Wonderful to hear about the momentum. Salil, I want to come to you now. Infosys is a services company, so very different, from manufacturing or having a sprawling supply chain. But technology is an enabler, and I think supply chains are all interconnected as well. How has Infosys been approaching responsible consumption and production? How are you helping your clients do that?
So thanks, Jessica. I think for us, really, technology's made a huge change in how all of this is happening. There's three examples that I wanted to share. First, there's a lot of usage of artificial intelligence and machine learning for real-time data, real-time connectedness in the supply chain. And that makes it much more efficient. These technologies are now prevalent. Each of the companies here are using them in different ways in their supply chains that we know of. The second is an area where the focus is really much more on transparency, leveraging knowledge and making sure that everyone is aware of what is in the supply chain and how it's being looked at. And here again, the technology of blockchain is used immensely. That makes it much more visible to all actors as to what's going on in a supply chain. And there are various ways of doing that. Most large enterprises are participating in that technology, and that makes it easier for people outside to see what each of the companies are doing and what each of the components in a supply chain are working through. And the third really is all about data, making sure that data sharing is sort of ubiquitous and also instantaneous. That makes for much better collaboration. And we've seen already examples here where there's data sharing across partners, across suppliers, and that makes for a better way to look at things from an entire ecosystem perspective, as opposed to individual components, examples just mentioned. So those are three sort of areas in technology that we are seeing and we are helping and supporting with. And there are several examples of this to make the supply chain, the production, and then even the consumption, which is visible through what is available in technology.
Thank you very much. I don't think we can achieve any of our sustainability initiatives without technology and digitalization today. So thank you for those examples. David, I want to come to you because food security has obviously been high on the agenda and in the news as well. And no thanks to the war, we've had supply chain shocks, inflation. And I think Cargill had recently, in recent years, been investing into new opportunities where you can produce food more sustainably. Cultivated meat is an example. How are you approaching this issue?
Well, alternative protein is one area that we've been investing in for about the last 3 to 4 years. And we do have a beef business, but consumers want choice. And additionally, the sustainability, plant-based protein has a more sustainable profile than does beef production, goes without saying. That being said, and Doug used the word collaboration and partnership, I think one of the benefits that came out of COVID and the disruption of supply chains was an appreciation for the complexity of food and ag supply chains. Not only the complexity, but all the steps that when food is produced, when it goes from the farm to the consumer, there's a lot of people involved. And the point being is that no one entity, whether it's the consumer goods company, the retailer, the food service company, the agriculture company, and the farmer, which is where it all begins, it's got to have a connection across the supply chain. And I think CPG companies and retailers have done a particularly good job of pulling the supply chain together. One of the things that we have done, speaking of collaboration, is, and it particularly focuses on smaller farmers. So we have 3 programs. A couple of them actually are, well, one's with P&G, so chose this example deliberately. I want to choose this example deliberately. And one happens to be with Walmart. Both of them are our customers. One's called Beef Up Sustainability. And it basically means going to individual ranchers this is in North America, that are raising cattle, and giving them steps, whether it's alternative forms of feed, which produces less methane, and methane, significant causal factor of greenhouse gas emissions, comes from the front end of the cow. And so different feed practices, different grazing practices, and teaching those grazing practices to the farmers, we will certify them as part of our Beef Up program, which is something that Walmart has been working with us, and then in turn they buy or sustainably produce beef. The second is a program to produce coconut oil in Indonesia and the Philippines. So there we've worked with about 4,000 farmers, again, small farmers, a couple hectares of farmland, to, again, teach them, here's how you can embed sustainability into your farming practices, and we will, again, certify it as sustainably produced coconut oil. And this is when, if you embed these practices and provide farmer education at a very early stage when the farms are small, then think about when they start to scale up, and that's the beauty of the program. And so then we sell the coconut oil to P&G. The final one is called Hatching Hope, and that's a program whereby we work with female farmers, female poultry farmers, and basically start with a chicken, give them a chicken, and it probably isn't their first, but sometimes it is. And then we will, again, educate them as far as sustainable practices for raising their poultry, feeding their poultry, the conversion of poultry waste. And I think the point of this all, or what I think one of the powerful things, is the evolution of food production and focusing on small farmers and focusing on sustainable practices has come so far in the last 10 years. It's no longer just, no pun intended, a commodity relationship where give me the best price. Farmer says to us, give me your best price, and I'll sell. If it's not a great price or I can sell somewhere else, I will. Now it's about providing them more with the market and more about training practices, particularly as it relates to sustainability. And this is, I think, one of the ways where agriculture can help solve issues related to climate change.
Thank you so much for that. I like the phrase, no longer a commodity relationship, because
Right.
I think in the early years it was very much so.
Exactly.
And today with stakeholder capitalism, we've seen that the level of engagement that you need to have with your supply chain is really up there. I want to be a little controversial and, kind of throw some questions at you, because for journalists who cover this issue, they would say that the most responsible thing to do is not consume. And that, there is this rise of anti-consumerism and perhaps eco-activist consumers that are really kind of driving change. Are you seeing this demand with your consumers, and what do you say to people who are saying that these changes are incremental and not radical?
I'll jump in. I think there is a percentage of the population everywhere that is more sensitive than other parts of the population, and they make decisions differently, which is great. And all of us feel the opportunity and the responsibility to be more transparent as we can over time about how supply chains work so that people can make more informed decisions. But there is also a very big part of the population that's under price pressure and cannot afford to make some choices that might cause them to pay more. So our job becomes one where you must design the system so that the easiest path, the lowest cost path, no negative trade-off associated with it, is actually the more sustainable path. And that's a great challenge. Like, how do you remove packaging? How do you make other decisions so that at the shelf level or on the app, when you're making that choice, if one's really value conscious, the one that you choose is actually more sustainable for the planet. So we try to embed the mindset with every merchant that we have, every other person that's making decisions in our company, so that they're thinking about the whole system and trying to design every product in every instance, regardless of how it's delivered, in a way that it's more sustainable. But over time, make it as transparent as you can so that people can make the most informed choice.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. Maybe, Salil, you want to pick up on the point of transparency really driving change in the supply chain.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the key to driving that transparency is making sure all of that is visible. For example, at Infosys, we're part of the UN Global Compact. And there we've taken, among other metrics, with our suppliers, with our partners, the metrics on environment, and making sure that in what they are doing with their ecosystem, all of those metrics are reflected and then are visible to us, and actually also visible in the broader market. So that is not easy depending on which geography you're functioning in. We know there are cost pressures across different suppliers, but the approach, as Doug mentioned, is to ensure that there is cost efficiency, while at the same time making sure is the most sustainable approach. Not an easy choice in many dimensions, but that's a challenge and an approach that we're all working at.
Thank you very much for that. And I think that you really made a good point around disclosure. And I think disclosure is really driving a lot of the change that we're seeing today. Listed companies now have to disclose to, so many different frameworks. And then your supply chain now also has to disclose. And so I think this point about transparency is very important. Alex, I want to come to you. So P&G recently, put out, some content around how your products are superior without a trade-off. And I think that that's very interesting, because you see increasingly consumers demand a certain level of sustainability standards in their products, but it always comes either at a higher cost or is not as superior. And we've actually seen studies that demonstrate that there's actually a gap between what consumers say and how aware they are, and actually how they buy, and actually the actions that they take. So, how has P&G approached this, and, what do you say to your consumers?
Yeah, and I think you've just written a great article about this. So I said this earlier, and Doug touched on this in his answer a few minutes ago. So our overall business strategy, if you shortcut it, is about irresistible superiority. What does that mean? That means if a person needs to diaper their baby or brush their teeth or wash their clothes or shampoo their hair, we want them to have a superior experience with our brands and products. We, as part of building sustainability directly into our business strategy, we have now articulated that strategy as irresistible superiority that is sustainable. And it is that strategy that we have our business unit teams working against. So as they innovate, as they bring new products to the market, they are not only delivering a superior experience, but they're doing it in a way that is more sustainable. Because we know, and we've seen the data, and you've reported on this data, 90% of consumers say they want to do something to reduce their footprint. We know that less than 20% of consumers actually do anything. And that is, one, because some of them are not sure what to do, but also because there are a lot of trade-offs, whether it be about the value of the product or the performance of the product. So we are now focused on delivering irresistible superiority that is sustainable, and through that ecosystem, delivering the commitments the company has made with their Ambition 2030 and Net Zero 2040 commitments. I'll give one example, and this is probably one of our most mature examples, but it's about laundry. So when you wash your clothes, there are 3 types of energy that clean your clothes in conjunction: mechanical energy from the machine, chemical energy from the product, and thermal energy from the temperature of the water. Our superior chemistry in Ariel, which is our global brand, or Tide in the US, if you're US-based, that superior chemistry provides the same cleaning in cold, the superior cleaning in cold water that others do in warm or hot water. So we've been on a campaign to get people to turn to cold. We're doing it in the US with Tide, but since we're here in Europe, I'll talk about Ariel. The average wash temperature of laundry in Europe is 42 degrees Celsius. And we have set a goal to, on average, get that reduced by 5 degrees Celsius. As we, and the way we have advertising campaigns that tell consumers this benefit, that they can get the same level of cleaning in cold with Ariel. In addition to that, it saves money on energy bills because they are not paying to heat their water. So there's a great value equation for the consumer in that. And as we achieve that goal, and we are seeing progress against it as we track it, as we achieve that goal, we can eliminate the equivalent of greenhouse gas emissions from the overall ecosystem that is almost 10 times the annual greenhouse gas emissions that our own operations have. So just shows the impact we can have by helping consumers change their own footprints, but still delivering benefits that they need and want in their daily life.
Thank you very much for the example. I'm just going to pause here and ask if anyone in the room has questions for our panelists. Okay, I'll let you think of some.
They're enthralled.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I asked
Stunned
you.
silence.
Yeah. So I just want to pick up on something that you said earlier, and really this is the whole personal responsibility versus the role of business and government. This conversation has been playing out in the media, and it's super interesting because you hear about how BP invented the carbon footprint so it can shift the responsibility into the consumer. And actually, really, we need systems to change, we need governments to legislate, we need companies to really radically invest in systems that are entirely different from what we are today. So my question to you is, to what extent do businesses have to really kind of accelerate what they're doing, not making incremental change, but significant change, to then give consumers that choice that they can actually say, okay, I actually have, this range of products and I'm going to go with the most sustainable one? No? David?
There are now 400 million items available on Walmart.com. There's a lot of choice and a lot of variety. Figuring out how to make the whole system more productive is obviously a big part of the challenge. And looking ahead, the role data is going to play, the role more advanced algorithms will play, the role of automation will all kick in to make this system more efficient. And that's happening right before our eyes. And I think having it woven into strategy so that this is all one piece of work is one of the keys. I think Alex made a great point earlier. The work, I can tell you from working with these two companies closely, the work, as they've said, is not some separate side job. It is woven into what we're doing every day now, and that's true for our company too, and I think that's really important.
That's really interesting. I just want to follow up with that question because I think Walmart built its reputation on, producing cheap, affordable items in your supply chain and to your customers. But increasingly, we're also seeing this consumer sentiment of buying less or buying more expensive goods that last a longer time. Patagonia launched a very successful campaign, "Don't Buy This Jacket," and it was exemplifying this movement with ethical consumerism. How is Walmart responding to that?
Yeah, I mean, people will make the decisions they're going to make, and families, customers will make those choices. They're going to want to eat. They're going to want to have some form of apparel. They're going to need a stroller if they have a baby. Our job is to make those products as sustainable as possible should they need them. And if they would rather buy something that's been used before, let's call it vintage because it sounds cooler, great. I mean, we're working today on how we can create product exchanges and thinking about how we can participate in that part of commerce too. We're going to go where the customer wants to go and ideally try to be ahead of where they're going.
Excellent, thank you. I think IKEA has been doing that for some time with their circular economy. Okay, we have two questions, we'll take them both. If you could stand and identify yourself, a microphone will come to you.
Thank you. Great discussion. I'm Pranjal Sharma from India, right on the intersection of technology and economy. This philosophy of consumer choice also means that you have 7 flavors of a cola, you have 25 flavors of a chewing gum, and then you say, well, let the consumer choose. You can have 20 options of packaging and let the consumer choose. And then, the cost makes a huge difference. So I'm wondering whether we're putting too much of the responsibility on consumers on some of these issues, when actually the large companies should be taking the lead and investing in the cost required to make a difference. There's these popular memes of, very nice, perfectly shaped bananas wrapped in plastic in most of the malls. Perhaps the e-commerce companies across the world, and I'm from India where there's a huge e-commerce revolution, and we are leading in last mile delivery using technology, and Salil knows that. Why can't companies take the responsibility for taking tough decisions? Limit the choice, but give better choice.
Very good question. Anyone wants to speak?
I mean, I can talk about the work we're doing, and I think it does bring together the system. As we look at our supply chain operations and efficiencies, certainly there's a level of choice that we want to give the consumer, but there's a level of choice that weighs down our own operations. So there's certainly something in it for us too to look at that. And we've seen the studies. I mean, and there's a famous one about jam or whatever, however you want to call it.
Paradox of choice.
Yeah, the paradox of choice. You give somebody 3 choices of jam, they're likely to buy one. If you give them 20 choices, they walk away because they're afraid they won't make the right choice. And it's proven. So we keep that in mind as we look for, how many different benefit spaces or things like that we need to think about in our product lines. So it is something that's core to the discussions that we have in our brand teams and our supply chain teams.
Thank you. We have a question here, the gentleman and over there. Maybe we can take both together and come back to the panel.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the discussion. I just had a question, and is why would we not start pricing externalities into the products? So we have not transparency. We know how much nature and how much environment is going to the products. If we price them in, the sustainable choices would be most probably much more attractive.
Excellent question, but we'll go to the gentleman behind, if you don't mind. Thank you. And then we'll come back to the panel.
Thank you. David, specifically a question for you. I bake biscuits for a living, so very simple, humble job. And I wanted to come back to your remark about farmers because that concerns me greatly. It's the most critical human aspect of my supply chain, right? And as you know, farmers work on notoriously thin margins. Historically, family farms. How have you been able to get them to look at new technologies and change what their father, grandfather, etc., said to them and convince them that they can actually make money and survive?
Can I take that, or you want to?
Take that first. Yeah.
So, what was your first name?
Saman.
Saman? Excellent question. 2 months ago, call it 3, I was with a group of farmers talking about sustainable agriculture, regenerative agriculture, and the dynamic you just described was fascinating to me because you've got a younger group of farmers, say they're 30-something, that recognize this is the way they have to go to be sustainable not only for the planet, but because companies like Cargill or Walmart, P&G, that's what they're going to want to buy in the future. And then you've got a dynamic of what you just alluded to, which is these family farms who say, my great-grandfather, great-grandmother has been planting row crops for the last 80 years, and why would I change? And I know how it works, I know the system, I know how much fertilizer and seed and pesticide and herbicide that I have to buy every year. So there is a cultural resistance. What I find interesting, however, is that I think that we can get to an inflection point, that the more of a younger generation of farmers, A, adopts it, and then B, shows this is lucrative. And now I'm going to come to my conclusion to answer your question. It can't be done without some type of financial encouragement. So what we're doing with the farmers is we will pay you a premium if you adopt, so our program's called Regen Connect. If you sign up for Regen Connect, and we've got a very specific target for how many hectares we want to have farmers, our customers, using Regen Connect. If you do this, cover crops, low till, no till, rotation, and the soil is such an underutilized asset in farming. If you do that, we will pay you a premium for your product. Because they won't have, in the first year, you're going to lose money because you're converting the soil, you're changing the nutrients in the soil, and so there isn't a financial incentive unless companies like ours and companies like the people on this panel represent are willing to pay that premium, which goes to the other questions that have been raised, is consumers, that's the ultimate buy signal, right? Demand pull. Consumers want it, they want to pay for it, but the farmers at the front end, they have to have financial incentive, a market, and safety so that they can provide you, a very simple, humble bakery owner, which I'm sure you're more than that, but you depend on them for your flour and for your oil seeds. And so I think it's our job to go to them and say, this is what you want, and we need to help incentivize you to convert to sustainable and regenerative agriculture processes.
Thank you.
Great question.
Thank you very much, David. Great segue into the premium that you pay, externalities and pricing. Maybe Alex or Doug, you want to share some thoughts on that?
Yeah,
Go ahead, please.
I'll try to briefly tell a story. It would be great if that was happening and happening everywhere, and we've started trying. It takes quite a bit of effort right now to figure out how to take the price of water, for example, and put it into the cost of a T-shirt. The internal phrase we use is everyday low true cost. Like holistically, what does this T-shirt cost? And the pilot that we've done out of the Mississippi River Valley in the United States, where the cotton's grown there, we measure everything else, including the water, all the way through to the shelf price, and then tell the customer the story. Took a tremendous amount of effort to get there, and if we're going to do it, we need everybody to do it. Now, maybe we can be a leader here and help pioneer that. That's our interest level. I wish I knew a shortcut. And if you have an idea on how to get there faster, how to have markets, banks, and others value the whole system, grab me after and tell me what the idea is. Because I think if we did what you're describing, it would accelerate progress, obviously.
Wonderful. Alex?
I mean, I think I don't have a ton to add. I think that the ability to actually cost these things out is the real challenge. But as we innovate on the total proposition. So because we know that people do not want to pay more just for more sustainable propositions. It needs to be the proposition in its entirety. And so yes, we need to better understand all those input costs and the costs of sustainable or not sustainable solutions. But we also need to think about the total value proposition for the consumer. And so we think about it systemically.
Thank you for that. Any final questions from the floor? If not, then perhaps I'll get the panelists to wrap up your thoughts on this panel. We've had a great, insightful discussion, obviously too little time. But if there's one thing that you'd like to change, that you think would actually make significant change for SDG 12 and for us to really achieve responsible consumption production, what would that be? Salil.
So I think I talked about technology earlier, but to me, really, the thing that's most critical is leadership. What's very encouraging is when you have these discussions here with any of the companies that are at the World Economic Forum, the leaders from there, there's absolute commitment, there's personal commitment, and people are looking to make a real change. And so the more of that we have, and the more we have that recognized, there's more chance of us getting things done.
Thank you. Doug?
I wish that we were all more like-minded, had more shared consciousness as it relates to things like the energy transformation, so that politics and other things that are slowing us down were less of an issue. We're still debating some stuff that we should have moved past.
Wonderful. Thank you for that sentiment.
And maybe just building a bit on that. I think, we have a supplier to P&G and a customer of P&G here on the stage. So as we think about this, it's really about the transparent and transformative partnerships that we have across the supply chain, the sharing of data, the sharing of understanding, and the scaling of our voice for the things that are most important.
Thank you very much. And David?
I think I would hearken back to my prior answer, which is a instantaneous, I mean, if it's a wish, conversion to regenerative or different farming practices. I think the soil as a carbon sequestration tool, I think the ability to scale up production in a more sustainable way that taxes the planet's resources less by conversion to regenerative agriculture. I think if we could have a faster or instantaneous conversion to regen ag practices, that would be one of my wishes in addition to the ones that were stated.
Thank you very much. And I think just to wrap up the panel, if I could maybe share a word, and that really is to measure your progress. Because I think with responsible consumption production, so much of that is really kind of incremental change, but then also thinking about how we can have systems change and how we can measure that and to actually disclose and report that as well. And so on this note, I'd like to just wrap up the panel. We have heard about innovative circular models. We've heard how transparency and disclosure is driving change on the ground. We've heard about partnerships, customers, stakeholder capitalism, and suppliers as well. And we've talked about pricing externalities. And I think that last point is really, really important. And I really thank you for putting that onto the agenda. I want you to join me to thank the panelists for today's discussion. It was wonderful, and I've really learned so much from all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd also like to thank the World Economic Forum, the platform for shaping the future of advanced manufacturing and the platform for shaping the future of consumption. They've actually got a very interesting initiative called the Reuse Metrics, which they're trying to pilot with some companies as well. And I do encourage you to find out more about these initiatives. Have a great rest of the day. Thank you.
One of the things I loved when I moved to Geneva.